the review session. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over some problems that will be helpful for midterm 1, which is going to be on Monday, February 22nd. I want to let everyone know that if you haven't done so already, if you could please fill out, there's a poll on Piazza asking you for your preferred section time. Please fill that out. We do need a response by Friday, or else there's going to be a penalty. And we really don't want to impose that. I mean, basically, if you don't fill it out, then we can't assign you to an exam time on Gradescope. And then, you know, last semester what happened was there were students who didn't get assigned to a time and then emailed us saying they didn't sign up and they didn't get assigned to a time. And we were able to help them and give them a time at the last minute. But the penalty is basically that you lose all of that time to sort of work on the exam instead. So if you could please do so, that would be great. And so today I have basically the following list of questions that I could cover. But I'm also more than happy to take any of your questions that you might have. So I have, you know, two multiple choice questions on the specific factors model. A student asked about how to solve for exports and imports in the endowment model. So I've got a little bit going over that. Problem 5 on the multiple choice questions in the practice midterm was a little bit tricky. And so someone asked me about that. And so I can go over that in more detail. I also have a bit where I can go over a sort of review basically export supply and import demand again from section 2, and then also talk about, you know, what causes changes and shifts in the sort of curves of sort of home and foreign. I have a sort of a multiple choice question on the terms of trade. So let's talk about the endowment model. The setup is going to be very similar to what we've had before. We're going to have home and foreign, and then just 2 goods that are going to be denoted 1 and 2. And preferences are going to be Cobb-Douglas, as we've always seen. And we're going to have that basically consumption of each good is going to have an exponent of half, which means that we're going to spend half of our income on the consumption of each of goods 1 and 2. Now, what's specific to the endowment model is that we don't have labor that can produce goods. What we're just, you know, at the beginning of the model, we're just endowed with a certain amount of 1 and 2, and that's just sort of comes down, and there's nothing we can do about it. So what we have is what we have is the way I like to call it. And I thought I fixed this typo, but this should say the production of good 2 and home. So endowments are the following: home and foreign both have 100 units of good 1. Foreign has 100 units of good 2, and home has 200 units of good 2. And apologies, I thought I fixed that typo there. So now what the problem we're going to ask is what are home's imports and exports, and what's going to be foreign's imports and exports as well. And so to solve this, I'm basically just going to want to give you a framework that you can use for thinking about any of these problems. And so this is useful for me. Maybe it's not as useful for you, but in any case, I'll show you. So the first thing that I always want to think about is I want to think about what's going to be my production here in this model. And when I mean production, I mean what is going to be that production is really here in this case in the endowment model is just what I'm endowed with. So there's no production in the endowment model. So production, the analog is just going to be what I'm endowed with. So just to start with production, it's super easy because we don't really have production. We just have what we have. And so if we you know, are given a certain endowment of goods, then that is equivalent to our production, quote unquote, in this model. And here, note that the typo is fixed. So sorry about that earlier. So given that we already know just from the onset what we have endowed with in our country, it's actually fairly easy in the endowment model to come to terms with what's going to be each country's income. So it's slightly harder, but it's still pretty easy. And so each country's income is just going to be adding up the value of all of the goods that it's endowed with. So if we just multiply each of the goods it's endowed with by their sort of prices, where these prices can either be an autarky or what the prices are when we open up to trade, we're just going to have that home's income is going to be 100. That's the quantity it has as good 1 times the price of good 1 times 200, which is the quantity it has of good 2 times the price of 2. And likewise, we can do the same for foreign. And here I'm just calling P1 and P2. I'm just calling these, making these arbitrary because this either may be sort of the autarky price or prices in world trade. So it's important to note that home's income is going to, depending on whether or not we're thinking about the prices of goods in world trade or not, home's income might vary based on those sort of prices. So that's great. We figured out what both home and foreign's income is going to be. So now let's move on to consumption. And so hopefully this should be all fairly straightforward, and very sort of review at this point. But if we have that preferences were given as they were, then by the properties of Cobb-Douglas functions, we know that having an exponent of half here means that we're going to spend half of our income. So I just want to be clear here. This is an I, so this means income. We're going to spend half of our income on the consumption of good 1. So that's going to be the price of good 1 times how much we consume of it, which if we just divide by C1 on both sides of this expression gives us, by P1 on both sides of this expression, excuse me, gives us that C1 must be equal to I over 2P1. And likewise, we can do the same for the consumption of good 2. So that's going to be for both home and foreign, and thinking of consumption in the world, that's going to be the sort of various values of consumption, where if we want to think of these things as world consumption, we would just have to replace everything with a superscript W, where instead of thinking about a specific country's income, we would just think of the world's income and then prices in the world. So, and this is what so what we can do is that if we divide C1 by C2, here we can just see quickly that if we divide C1 by C2, then that's akin to doing this. And so if I just move this down here, so these i's cancel, the 2's cancel, and then this P1 flips up here. And so what we'll get is we'll get C2 over C1 is equal to P1 over P2. Okay, so where this is going to be useful is that we're going to be able to use this to solve for world prices. And the thinking here is that if we want to solve for world prices, then we just need to note that when we add up all of the consumption in the world, it has to be equal to whatever the world is producing, or in this case, probably the world's endowment is probably closer to the word that we should be using here. So basically what that means is that if we're calling C1W the world's total consumption of good 1, then that has to be equal to both adding up both home's endowment of good 1 and foreign's endowment of good 1. Likewise, if we just call C2W the world's consumption of C2, well, that can't exceed what the two countries have been endowed with of good 2. And so if we just replace everything in this expression with the W to indicate the world values, and we just plug in for the values of what we know using these expressions, the world consumption of both goods must be, then we can solve for the relative price of good 1 in terms of good 2 for the world. And so what doing that yields that the price of good 1 in terms of good 2 at the world level when we open up to trade is going to be 3 over 2. Does anybody have any questions about how I did that? Okay. So now what we've done is we figured out what the world price is going to be in the endowment model. And so now what we're going to do is we could focus on good 1, but just for simplicity, I'm going to focus on good 2. And now that we know our income and our prices, now I can solve for actually what the actual value is going to be of what home consumes of good 2. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to take this expression that I used before to solve for world consumption, and I'm just going to use it to solve for homes consumption, where I just need to plug in for, instead of world's income, home's income here. And remember that I'm thinking about home being opened up to world trade. So the price that I'm going to plug in is going to be the world price. So home's income, which I stated from above, is equal to 100p1 plus 200p2. So if I plug this in here and divide everything by 2 over p2, what I'm left with is 50 p1 over p2 plus 100. And if I just plug in then for the world price, that's going to give me 75 plus 100, which yields 175. So home is going to consume 175 units of good 2. For foreign, I can do the same thing. So I can just plug in for foreign's income here. And likewise, that's just going to yield a value of 125. So this is all just basically plugging into the formulas and then just sort of taking the income that we have and then plugging in for world prices to give us values of consumption. Okay, so in this slide, I'm just sort of restating everything that we know. I'll leave it to you as an exercise to you that you can determine the values of how much foreign and home are going to consume of good 1. But now that we have all this, we can finally move on to export supply and import demand. And this is much easier to determine than in the Ricardian model, namely because we already know when we open up to trade what the world price is going to be. I already derived it a couple steps ago. So all we need to do is we just need to compare what the endowments are of each good to what the consumption values of each good for each country is. And then that will be able to tell us whether or not each country is going to be importing or exporting a good. So let's again keep focusing on good 2. For home, we can note that home's consumption of good 2 of 175 units is lower than what it's been endowed with. And so the leftover, it has to be exporting. And so it exports the remaining 25 units to foreign. And likewise, foreign is going to be importing good 2 because foreign's consumption of good 2 is higher than what it was endowed with. And it's natural to think that whatever home's exporting to foreign is going to be exactly what foreign is going to be importing from home. And so it makes sense that both of those, both exports and imports of good 2 from both home and foreign are the same number. And so it's not really a big surprise that we have that. So that is how we solve for export supply and import demand in the endowment model. So hopefully this sort of puts in a framework in which you can sort of compare it to the Ricardian model. That's all I have on sort of the endowment model.
Sorry,
yeah.
Excuse me, James. I got a question. So based on the calculations to find the amount of export and import, so in the lecture 2 slide, we were learning about the a little bit fancy export formula to find the home export on good G. And do we ever use that formula to find the amount in export and import?
Yeah, so so what you saw in lecture 2 and I'll be able to sort of get on to that actually coming up next. But the formulas that you saw in lecture 2 were for deriving export supply and import demand in the Ricardian model. And so in particular, what's different about the Ricardian model is that you don't actually know what the equilibrium world price is when you're solving for export supply and import demand. So you need to sort of consider different cases when you're sort of then you'll use the equation of export supply and import demand to solve for world price. Here we already knew the world price just from whatever the prices were sort of originally determined by how much our world was endowed with of those goods, and that sort of fixed prices from the beginning. The difference is in the Ricardian model we need to figure out those prices.
Okay, got it. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. But that's a good segue into what I was going to do next. But before I do that, does anyone else have any questions on this before
I have a question.
Yep.
Could you go back to the previous slide?
Sure.
And re-explain how you found consumption of good 2 at home, just that whole line. I just
Sure.
found a little fast for me.
Sure, of course. So you follow along with how the properties of Cobb-Douglas functions imply this relationship, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So then what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to replace all of these values with Holmes' version of these values. So I'm going to plug in for Holmes income, and what I want to think about is I want to think about Holmes' consumption of good 2 in free trade. It's going to be different when Holmes in autarky, but right now I'm just thinking about export supply and import demand. So I really only care about what Holmes consuming when it's in world trade. So to be clear, this might change in autarky, but then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take Holmes income from above. And so where Holmes income is basically just what it's endowed with times its prices. And so then here, what I do is I take income, I plug it in here, and then I'm just going to divide everything by 2 PW2. So if I just divide everything by 2, this gives me 50. This gives me 100. If I just divide everything by P2 here, then I get P1 over P2, and then this P2 cancels out. So then I get 50 P1 over P2 plus 100. I can,
yeah.
Sorry. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense. I was just going to quickly ask, so if that was in autarky, would we be using the price at home? Exactly. Or would that not apply in this model?
No, exactly. So you'd be doing the price at home. And so in this case, if we just wanted to have the price at home instead, we would just need to figure out what this would be. But at home, we can only, when we're in autarky, we can only consume exactly what we're endowed with. And so the way that we would solve for Holmes' autarky price is we would just replace these consumption values with exactly the amount that we've been endowed with. When we move to free trade, we don't necessarily have to consume exactly what we've been endowed with, and so that's what's different. So the big difference between calculating them both is that you'd figure out a different relative price when Holmes in autarky.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so I'm going to move on to.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, sure, please.
Can we go over like just in general like the difference between the Ricardian model and the endowment model? Besides, like we know the world price for the endowment model. Like
yeah. Let me put your question a little bit on hold. I will come to it when I get to. I will cover import demand and export supply in the Ricardian model. So if it's okay, I'm just going to put your question on hold, but I will definitely cover the differences.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yep. So let's talk about problem 5 in the practice midterm. So this one is a little different. So I definitely got questions on this. And I can't promise you that you'll see something exactly like this, but I still think that it exemplifies how you want to use this sort of thinking about production, thinking about income, thinking about what consumption is to derive export supply and import demand. So I think you still want to use the same logical framework, even if things are a little bit different in this problem. So just a statement of this problem 5 that's on the practice midterm that I posted on B courses is that suppose that the consumers in California are always going to consume 2 avocados with every loaf of bread. What economists call that is they call that Leontief preferences, but you don't really need to remember it. When California opens to trade, it's going to completely specialize in producing bread. And so if California is going to produce 100 loaves of bread, when the relative world price of a loaf of bread is 6, how much is California going to export and import of both avocados and bread? So again, we're going to sort of use the same framework. We're going to think about production, we're going to think about income, consumption, and then export supply and import demand. So we have 2 goods here, avocados and bread, just to restate the problem. The preferences, you can forget that they're Leontief, but what's important is that we just want to think that Californians are always going to consume 2 avocados with every loaf of bread, and so CA is going to be 2 times CB. So if there was 1 loaf of bread, here, then CA needs to be equal to 2. And so that gives us this expression here. And so these are going to be sort of our preferences, which is going to be a little bit different than the sort of usual Cobb-Douglas preferences we have, excuse me. So we know production under trade. It's pretty similar to, in this case, production never changes in the context of this problem. We're not given, what the productivities of labor are in the various sectors or things like that. So in that sense, this problem is actually closer to the endowment model. And so because we're just endowed with a given number of goods. So, maybe this sort of might be sort of endowment-esque of a problem. But so anyway, just what we're endowed with is California has 0 avocados and 100 units of bread. We're told that relative prices are going to be the PB over PA is equal to 6. We can also just, for simplicity, and what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to set PA equal to 1. But even if you don't set PA equal to 1, you can figure it, like, it'll make sort of the, some of the units disappear, and it'll look a little prettier. But all of the steps are going to be the exact same, regardless of whether or not we set PA equal to 1. So that's not really an important step there. But I'm going to do it just to make things look a little bit cleaner. For the income for California, likewise, it's just going to be whatever it's endowed with times its price. And so has 100 units of bread, and the price is 6. And so California's income is 600. So now that I have prices and I have income, I can solve for what consumption should be. And so solving for consumption is going to be a little bit different here than in the than when we have Cobb-Douglas utility. But the identity that we can use is that we can't spend any more of our income. We can't spend, our expenditures on both goods can be no larger than our income. And so if we just add up, the cost of purchasing all of the units of avocados that we buy and the cost of purchasing all of the units of bread that we buy, it has to be less than our income. So that's going to imply that, if we recall that I've set the price of avocados equal to 1, that implies that CA plus 6CB is equal to 600, recalling that PB is equal to 6. Okay.
Should we always assume that they spend all of their income?
Yeah. So
okay.
in this case, what Leontief preferences, like the preferences basically are always going to assure that we get more utility from consuming more goods. And so we're always going to want to consume more up to our income. So if we're consuming less than our income, then we won't be as well off if we consume exactly equal to our income. And so you can always assume that we'll be consuming enough of avocados and bread such that we spend all of our income. We're not like saving our income for a next period or anything like that in sort of these models.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So now what we can do is we can use this and just plug into CA here to solve for what we must be consuming of say, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting bread alone. And so if I do that, I know that CA is equal to 2CB. And so if I just cancel that out here, I get 2CB plus 6CB is equal to 600. And so that's going to give me 800 CB is equal to 600, which it yields that CB is equal to 75. And I just saw that there was something in the chat. I'm not sure how long ago. Sorry, I'm not always checking the chat. So, oh yes, I already answered that question. So if we know that our consumption of bread is going to be 75, then, and we know that we consume twice as many avocados as we consume of bread, then California's consumption of avocados therefore must be 150. So like we had before, if we know what we're endowed with and we know what we're consuming, then it's pretty straightforward just to get to what our imports and exports must be. If we know that we consume more avocados than we're endowed with, which is nothing, then our consumption of avocados must be coming from imports. And so California's imports of avocados are 150. we're endowed with more bread, 100 units of bread than we're consuming. And so the remainder must be exported, and the remainder is 25. And so California's exports of bread are going to be 25. And so the answer to this problem is F, which is imports are 150 units and exports are 25 loaves. Any questions on that before I move on?
Can you go back to the previous slide for just like 2 seconds?
Period.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so let's talk now, and here's where I'll get back to the earlier question on the differences between the Ricardian model and the endowment model. So I've purposely made this as similar to the setup as what we've seen before in the endowment model, where again, we're going to have home and foreign. We're going to have two goods denoted 1 and 2. And preferences are going to be identical to the way they were before, where we spend half of our income on each good. What's new and different about this is that we're endowed with a factor of production that we can use to produce either good 1 or good 2 with certain labor productivities. And so the big difference is that in the endowment model, our production is fixed. So Q1 and Q2 are fixed. And so that's in the endowment model. But in the Ricardian model, Q1 and Q2 depend on how much labor we allocate to sector 1 and sector 2. And so that's the big difference is that all of the sort of consumption decisions, we have the same utility function. We have a lot of the things, income look very similar. But the big difference is that production can change as, for instance, the relative prices of goods change. And so what we really want to think is that production isn't going to be fixed. It's going to depend as a country finds different goods to be more or less profitable to produce. And so that's going to be the main difference between the endowment model and the Ricardian model. Otherwise, they're very similar in terms of their structure. So this is... I don't know if you'll remember, but this is the exact same setup for the as what we saw in section 2. So maybe those productivities look familiar, and the answer is because they are. So in the endowment model, you're told exactly what you're producing from the onset, but to figure that out in the Ricardian model, you want to figure out who's going to have a comparative advantage and what first. And so basically, you're just going to use that the relative prices of goods in autarky are inversely proportional to the moderate productivities of labor in each sector. And that's going to be what's going to determine comparative advantage. So we can determine that the autarky price, the relative autarky price of good 1 in foreign is going to be 1, and the relative autarky price of good 1 in home is going to be 2. And so foreign is going to have a relatively lower opportunity cost of producing good 1 in terms of good 2. And so foreign is going to have the comparative advantage in good 2. Now, it's going to be important to stress that, when these two countries open to trade, we can expect that the world price is going to be in between the prices of each country in autarky. And not strictly speaking, the prices could be equal to one of the two. But so whenever the world price is going to be greater than 1, we're going to see that foreign is going to have a comparative advantage in good 1. If, for instance, when they opened up to trade, suppose that there's a bunch of other countries. Obviously, when we opened up to trade with just home, world prices wouldn't look like this. But suppose there's 10 countries out there in the world and world prices look like that. Then if foreign opens up to trade, things are actually, and they find that world prices look like this, then the situation is actually reversed. Foreign now has the comparative advantage in good 2. And so if world prices looked like this, then foreign wouldn't actually produce good 1 here. So it's only when foreign opens up to trade and the world price is greater than 1, as it would be here if we only opened up to trade with 2 countries, that foreign would actually produce good one and fully specialize in it. And likewise, we can say the same thing for home. You know, with two countries, whenever one country has a comparative advantage in one good, the other country has the comparative advantage in the other good. And so just by sort of process of elimination, we can say that home has a comparative advantage in good too. And a similar logic is going to apply here, that, you know, if home opens up the trade, it'll only have a comparative advantage in good two when the relative price of good one is less than two. I'm going to pause here to take a drink of water and ask if anyone has any questions about this, because I know it's not super obvious. Okay, I'll take that silence to mean that I
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
So once both home and foreign opens up to trade, how would the process of like elimination, like how does the world price determine like if one industry will disappear or not?
Yeah, so basically what it's going to be is that you want to think about it in terms of opportunity costs. And so, you know, what the relative price is effectively saying is that you know, if I produce 1 unit of good one, how many units of good two am I giving up to do that? Now, when I open up to trade, and suppose I'm foreign, if I am producing, say, if I am able to produce good one at this relative price, and the world's price is higher than that, then that means that relative to the world, I'm going to be able to produce more of good one for losing less of good two than I would if I just sort of traded on the world stage. And so it's more profitable for me to make good one, to buy, and then to buy good two on the world stage. And so it's really a statement of because my opportunity cost of producing good one is lower than the other countries, I will find it more profitable to produce one good rather than the other. And because in the Ricardian model, we only have two goods, and labor, we have sort of constant returns to scale in labor. We're going to basically have that one and only one good is going to be the more profitable one to produce.
Okay, so in that case, foreign will like never produce goods too.
So yes, foreign in that case, when the price is strictly higher, when the world price is strictly higher than foreign's autarky price, it will never produce good too. That's right.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to solve for relative prices under world trade using both the export supply and import demand curves. And in this section, as opposed to section 2, I'm going to focus on good one rather than good two. So I'm going to talk about the flip side of the market. So again, we can use the same framework as before to sort of think about this. And basically all we need to figure out is production, income, consumption, and then that will tell us all we need to know about export supply and import demand. So let's start off with production. So we already said that foreign has a comparative advantage in good one. Then what you can note is that we said that foreign's productivity in producing, excuse me, foreign's productivity, oh, shoot. Sorry, I'm having issues drawing. Foreign's productivity in good one is 4, and recall that foreign is endowed with 1 unit of labor, and so if foreign it has a comparative advantage in one, it's going to fully specialize in the production of good one, and so the quantity that it's going to produce of good one is just going to be given by it's the marginal productivity of labor of foreign in good one times the units of labor devoted to the production of good one in foreign. But of course, if we're fully specialized, then foreign is just going to use all of its labor force in the production of good one. So what that's going to give us is that the maximum number of units of good one the foreign can produce is 4. So and then we devote 0 units of labor to the other good, and so it's fairly easy to see that the foreign's production of the other good is going to be 0. Given that we're only producing 1 good, foreign's income is going to be super easy. It's just going to be the price of good 1 times the number of units they produce. And so they produce 4 units of good 1, and then we don't know the price yet. So we just have to leave foreign's income for now as 4 times P1. Consumption just comes from Cobb-Douglas preferences, and so again, we've been using the same Cobb-Douglas preferences all this review session, and so this hopefully should be straightforward. All I'm going to do here is I'm just going to plug in for foreign's income here, and that's going to give me 4P1 over 2P1. P1s cancel, and then these cancel, and all I'm left with is that foreign's consumption of good 1 is going to be 2. So that's fairly straightforward. Okay, and then we can figure out now what foreign's export supply is going to be, and we know it's going to be export supply because we can just see from the start that foreign's oops, sorry, I'm having issues with my pen. Foreign's production of good 1 is higher than its consumption. So we can figure out what foreign's export supply is going to be. So we already said that when the price is the world price is less than 1, foreign's exports are going to be 0. And the reason of why that would be is because if the world price was less than 1, as I was saying earlier, then foreign would actually have a comparative advantage in good 2, and so they'd produce good 2 rather than good 1. And so if you're not producing good 1, then you obviously can't export it. So the only time that we're going to be exporting things is going to be when the world price is going to be greater than equal to 1. And so, for instance, when it's strictly greater than 1, we know that we'll fully specialize in good 1, and so the export supply is just going to be given by the amount that we're producing minus the amount that we're consuming, which again is 2. And then at autarky prices, we're in this sort of weird corner case, but the way I like to most easily think about it is that if the price, when the world price is below 1, foreign exports are 0, and when it's above 1, foreign exports must be 2, then we must have that, in this sort of little corner case, we have that exports are going to be just in between those two values. So they're going to be in between 0 and 2. Okay, and so now what we can think about is we can think about home's side of the equation. So home has a comparative advantage in good 2, and so they're not going to produce any of good 1. And we can use the same sort of logic to figure out that they're going to produce 6 units of good 2. Again, since they're only producing good 2, their income only depends on good 2, and so that's just going to be, their income is going to be the 6 units that they produce of good 2 times its price. Again, we just use Cobb-Douglas preferences and plug in for home's income here to give us that we have 6 over 2 times P1 over P2. So these cancel and give us 3. And then what we're left with is 3 P2 over P1, or equivalently, and sometimes we like to write this as 3 times P1 over P2 inverse. This is just because this is going to help us when we graph things, but if you write it as 3 P2 over P1, of course, that is also correct. And going back to what I said earlier, one of the big assumptions that we made here is that home is going to fully specialize. But home, as I was saying earlier, home is only going to fully specialize when the world price is less than 2. The relative world price of good 1 is less than 2. Because, for instance, if the world price was above it when home opened a trade, then home would actually have a comparative advantage in good 1. And so if it had a comparative advantage in good 1, it wouldn't need to import good 1 from abroad. It would just be producing and consuming its own supply of good 1. And so the only corner case that we need to think about is what home's import demand is going to be when we're in autarky and have prices that are given as we're in autarky. And so the way to think about this is, let's think about home's consumption of good 1 as a function of P1 over P2. And so as you can see, home's consumption is a function of P1 over P2. And so let's think about what home's consumption is when we have prices that are equal to a relative price of good 1 equal to 2, well, then that's equal to 3 and then times 2 raised to the exponent -1, which is equal to 3 over 2. So this is 1.5. And so we want to have basically, if prices start to get down to 2, or sorry, if prices get down to 2, then we have consumption of 1.5. If prices get above 2, then if prices get up to 2, then we have 1.5. If prices get above 2, though, home's import demand is going to be 0. And so at autarky prices, we just need to have something in between these two values. And so import demand is going to vary from 0 to 1.5. Okay, and so we can draw this basically here, just to reiterate. So right here, we're going to have that this is going to be home's import demand. So it goes from 0 to 1.5 when the relative price of good 1 is equal to 2. Foreign's export supply is going to go from 0 to 2 when the relative price of good 1 is equal to 1. And then it's going to be fixed at 2 units otherwise. And then home's import demand, when prices are less than 2, is going to be given by this expression. So it's going to be 3p1 over p2 inverse. And so then when we want to figure out what, for instance, the price is going to be, we just need to look for the intersection between these two curves. And the intersection is given where we have that foreign's export supply, which is 2, is equal to home's import demand, which is 3p1 over p2 inverse. And so that's going to give us the relative price of p1 over p2 equal to 3/2. And then, of course, at that price, we can just see that we'll have that exports which are going to be equal to imports are going to be given by 2. So does anyone have any questions about that?
Hi, James. Can you repeat like why there would be a horizontal? A vertical light on the.
Sure. So basically here, so you can notice that if I just let's try to figure out what foreign's export supply of good 1 is. So foreign's export supply is going to be given by its production minus its consumption. And so if its production is 4 and its consumption is 2, then it's equal to 2. But note that this doesn't depend on price. So and by doesn't depend on price, I mean as long as prices are greater than 1, then exports are constant and they don't depend on price. And so as long as prices are such that foreign has a comparative advantage in good 1, then foreign's exports are going to be constant. And so just going to the graph, as long as we're in this region here, where the relative price of good 1 is greater than 1, in this point, this is the sort of region in which foreign has a comparative advantage in good 1. Then we have that exports are fixed. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah, no worries. Does anyone else have any
questions? I have a question.
Sure.
How can you explain one more time how you found that the relative price was 3 over 2?
Sure. So let me clear this. So basically what I'm looking for is I want to find the point at which foreign export supply is equal to home's import demand. And so like one way you could think about this, and it actually sometimes helps to draw a graph, is that you basically want to sort of see what range these sort of values must be in such that you'll have these equal to each other. So it might be that certain values, when you have like certain values of the prices, you'll never find a point at which foreign export supply is equal to home's import demand. So basically what you have to do is you kind of have to guess which points, and in this case, drawing a graph will be useful. So like, if you know that foreign's export supply in this range is 2, then foreign's export supply here is 2, and home's import demand here, we're in this sort of downward sloping curvy part of the line, which means that home's import demand is going to be given by 3 over P1 over P2 inverse. And so what we're going to say is, if we can find some P1 over P2 that sets these equal to each other, then that will be what the world price will be. However, it might be, for instance, suppose that foreign's export supply shifts out to here. It might be that when we do that, it might be that, for instance, if you just sort of suppose foreign's export supply shifts out to 4 units, it might be that we'll see that the foreign's export supply won't yield us a price that's in the range that we want. So just in terms of my example, suppose that foreign's export supply is here, and I know that this won't intersect at this point, but I say foreign's export supply is 4, and this will be equal to 3 P1 over P2. And so let's solve for what price that must generate. So suppose that we have 4, and maybe maybe I haven't set a good example here. No, this will work. So 4 is equal to 3 P1 over P2. And so let's solve for what that must imply about P1 over P2. So I'm going to divide on both sides by 4, and then multiply on both sides by P1 over P2. So these cancel. And so what I'm left with is that P1 over P2 must be equal to 3/4. But if P1 over P2 is 3/4, then I'm in the range that's below where foreign's export supply will be, if the price is equal to P1 over P2 is equal to 3/4, then I'm below the price where foreign will specialize in good 1. And so if this is the price, then foreign will actually produce good 2. And so basically what you have to do is that you have to look for where these intersect, and if when they intersect, it yields a price that's in the right range. And so just going back to the math that I would do for the original case, I said that this was 2, this was 3 P1 over P2 inverse. And so setting these equal to each other gives that we must have this. And so then that's going to imply that P1 over P2 is equal to 3 over 2. And fortunately, I find that it falls in this nice full specialization zones here. And so I find a price that actually works with having foreign's export supply equal to 2 and home's import demand given by that value. Does that make more sense?
That makes sense, but just a follow-up question. So we know the range, where did the range come from again? That we know 1 to 2?
Yeah, so basically the range comes from going back to the range of when each country is going to have a comparative advantage in which good. And so foreign, as I said, is going to have a comparative advantage in good 1 when foreign opens up to trade, and the world price of the relative price of good 1 is greater than what foreign's autarky price would be. And so just consider that, the alternative, that if, for instance, the world price was less than foreign's autarky price when it opened up to trade, well, then we would say that, actually in this case, foreign has a comparative advantage in good 2 rather than good 1. And so the upshot of that is that they would produce good 2. And so it must be that when we open up to world trade, the world price has to be greater than 1 in order for foreign to have a comparative advantage. And so we think about the range of values that implies that each country is fully specializing in. And so that gives us the range of the prices.
Okay, thank you. That really clears it up. Thanks so much.
Yep, no worries. So I'm actually sort of overshot the time by a little bit, but I think it's okay. I'm happy to take any more questions. I probably won't be able to cover more. As I said, I will try to cover the remainder in the 9 p.m. section. So, and I'll try to edit those together so you can watch. But happy to take like basically take any more questions right now of sort of this or any other material. I have time, so I can stick around for a bit.
Oh, hi, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like in the lecture, like we have like the similar graph, but for the like foreign export supply, I think we have like symmetrical one as the like home import demand. Like it seems like it's not a vertical line.
Oh, in the textbook?
Yeah, it seems like a curvy, like
yeah, like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what the basically the textbook is sort of giving like a very general version, but it turns out that when you have Cobb-Douglas preferences that sort of are of the form that is preferences that are basically of the form that look like this, which is pretty much all, you know, we only have preferences like that in this class with the Leontief example that I showed you aside.
Mm-hmm.
When preferences look like this, foreign's export supply is always vertical. So if with different preferences, it actually could be the foreign's export supplies is sort of has a little bit more, it's not just like totally vertical, but with the preferences that we use for like above a given price for like, you know, one country is always going to export the same, like a fixed share, but it's dependent on preferences. If we had different preferences, it would look different, but in this class, we'll pretty much only see examples with Cobb-Douglas preferences. So in your mind, it's probably okay just to think like your export supply curve is always going to be sort of a vertical above a certain point.
Oh, like so this graph means that if the price world price is greater than the relative price at foreign, then it will export all of its goods.
No, it exports but it will export a constant share. So it'll export, it'll export the same share of its production always.
Oh, okay.
But it doesn't export everything that it's producing. It consumes some of what it's producing, but it exports a constant share of what it's producing. So yeah, that's
it's the quantity minus the consumption, right?
That's right. But that'll always be a fixed number with Cobb-Douglas preferences.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
I have a question, but I'm not really sure how to phrase it.
Sure.
So you said, yeah. So when you were talking about it maybe being easier looking at it graphically when the amount is below the P1 over P2 equals 1, you know, when you were saying that we were exporting it. So how do you know which good is which? Or are we just determining it by like it being on the y-axis?
Yeah, so basically what you want to do is if I'm thinking about, for instance, good 1, then I always want to think about having so I'm examining like good 1 here, like in section 2, we examined good 2 instead. And so it's just whichever like good we're examining is the one that's going to be in the numerator. So it's going to be the relative price of good 1 with respect to the other good. And the reason is you know, it's just harder to, it's much easier to sort of graph it if the sort of relative price of the good that we're examining is in the numerator.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.